In 2010, they said this: no medical school teaches evolutionary biology as a basic science. They were lamenting this fact.
Wow.
He said, no medical school teaches evolutionary biology as a basic science comparable to embryology. We're not even talking about electromagnetic theory or quantum mechanics, not even as good as embryology.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. Welcome to Real Science Radio. I'm Fred Williams.
And I'm Doug McBurney, Bible student, science geek, amateur comedian. Fred, it is great to be back with you talking about real science on Friday.
Today we welcome back to Real Science Radio one of our favorite scientists and bioresearchers, Mr. Sal Cordova, who is going to talk about doctors and chemists who've made gigantic advancements in science and medicine without Darwinism. It's great to have you joining us again, Sal.
Oh, thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this for months.
Yes, great. Sal, it's fantastic to have you back. After the last time you joined us, you pretty much took down Darwinian evolution. I was very close to making a prediction about peak Darwin. You guys may not be familiar, but I nailed peak woke. I picked it. I picked peak woke. Are you guys familiar with the concept of peak woke?
No.
Okay, peak woke is when the president of Harvard was caught plagiarizing and she was not able to overcome it and she got fired. Do you guys remember that story?
Yes. Yeah.
That was peak woke. From there, woke only goes downhill. Now, and I think we're coming up on peak climate, which we'll have to have Dr. Homan back on and congratulate him for nailing peak climate. And with you, Sal, it's quite possible that with your takedown regarding the truth that proteins do not have a common ancestor and your elucidation of that, that might be the top of the mountain at peak Darwin. And it might be, we might be going down the other side, brother.
Well, it's happening experimentally because in the last 15 years, all the experiments that were very carefully studied showed that Darwinian evolution works the opposite of what he claimed. It's loss of genes. So the peak of Darwinism has happened and they're not even, the other side's not even realizing it. I said, look at all your experiments. How are you going to evolve something of great complexity when practically all experiments show it's always a net loss of genes and complexity and versatility? I mean, it is just ubiquitous. You start to search the literature. So what's particularly delicious about this, I didn't do it. They're basically self-destructing.
Darwinism's been refuted. So we're just kind of, to me, it's like a cat playing with a mouse at this point.
Well, I think it's more like a cat playing, fighting with a rat and thousands of rats and one cat. Now, I did see a video of a pheasant farm where it was infested with rats. And for a variety of reasons, they couldn't just stop the rats by doing anything. The traps weren't working, the poisons weren't working. So they got these guys with terriers, 3 of them, trained terriers, rat killers. And they went out and just wiped out the entire rat population. There were just piles of rats, 1,000 rats in just a week. And I think this is where I want to go, is that we need some killer arguments and we need people to prosecute the case. We will win. And I'm going to cover that today. And there's reason to be encouraged because the title, What's Wrong with Evolutionary Biology, is actually a title of a paper written by an evolutionary biologist.
Oh,
yeah.
This is a Cambridge evolutionary biologist. You know you're winning when they write titles of papers like that. And it's amazing no one picked up on it, but, Google helps you find stuff. I just randomly Googled, I said, what's wrong with evolutionary biology? A 2016 paper by John J. Welch. And he said, I go to these meetings with other evolutionary biologists, and it is dispiriting. It's demoralizing. The laundry lists of problems. Now, when you read his actual paper, I was like, this is so anemic. This is just like a speck of the problems. You haven't even dealt with the problems, like I said, genomes decay despite sustained fitness gains, or the protein orchard. You did, or the evolution of eukaryotes. I could have given him an even bigger laundry list, but I was like, wow. Now, he wasn't the first to do this. The first one that was of prominence to do this, actually, it resulted in congressional investigation because the persecution he suffered for coming out of the closet was so severe that Congress got involved. And that man was Richard Sternberg. It resonates. He's been somewhat forgotten, and it's kind of sad because he had 2 PhDs, one in molecular evolution and the other in theoretical systems biology. I mean, the guy was absolutely brilliant. And he got in trouble when he said, look, there are a lot of problems. Now, he said, I don't believe in intelligent design, but the guys have a point. We haven't solved all these problems. And that was enough to get him fired. And it was so bad, it was so egregious what happened to this scientist that a congressional investigation was started.
Sal, this all rings a bell, but what you've just revealed in my mind in real time is that this was basically shoved under the rug. I mean, the whole story of Richard Sternberg was a huge scandal. It was a huge scandal, and I've almost forgotten about it until you mention it right now. Wow.
I want to contrast that. I don't know a single mathematician that suddenly, I don't believe in real numbers anymore. I don't believe in the operation.
Yeah.
And even though we know that classical electromagnetism, the theory of it, is an approximation, I don't know a single physicist that rejects it. No one has come out and said, hey, I no longer believe in this, because it has too many problems. And this is a good contrast then. I would like to contrast what experimental science is versus evolutionary biology. I'm going to argue that evolutionary biology is really more like a religion. And the funny thing is, an atheist or / agnostic, Michael Ruse, philosopher of science, he wrote a book, Darwinism as Religion. Darwinism as Religion. This wasn't a creationist saying it. It was one of their own. And he was observing they had their high priests, they have their canon, and they also have their heretics.
Yeah.
And so Richard Sternberg, I guess, was regarded as a heretic, and there was an inquisition. Sadly, the Congress said, look, what happened to Sternberg was wrong, but we don't have jurisdiction over this. So they concluded, this was definitely a witch hunt, and it wasn't based on science. And I'll cover more of that today. Now, more recently, there's Gunter Beckley. Oh, my goodness. He is a paleobiologist. You could say he's an evolutionary biologist, too. He was promoting Darwinism in Germany in the Darwin Day celebrations and had hunt crowds because he's a curator of the museum there. He was, till they got rid of him. And in the process, during the Darwin Day celebration, he wanted to compare, look at all this stuff in evolutionary biology, and he wanted to show all the few ID books that were there. But he decided to read some of them. That changed his mind. And once he came, the light struck him, and he began to see the light, just like Sternberg. He came out of the closet and said, I think everything that I've been promoting is wrong. And you know what happened to him?
Wow.
I'm highlighting here,
Well, Sal, before you go on, it reminded me of Ben Stein when he did that movie, Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. So while you're going through all of this, I pulled that up on Wikipedia, and here's what it says. It's a 2008 American documentary-style propaganda film. Propaganda film. The film contends that there is a conspiracy in academia to oppress and exclude people who believe in intelligent design. I mean, you're giving prime examples right now, but they try to dismiss this and try to, you guys are your conspiracy nuts. This is propaganda. This isn't propaganda.
No, not at this stage. And I'm going to give even more evidence. So if you'll permit me, since I was an engineer in a former life, I still view myself as that. And Daniel Dennett said biology is engineering. And even though he's a Darwinist, I said he got one thing right in his life. That is true. And as you know, like in one of our shows, I said 1/3 of the engineers at MIT are working on biology problems. They have the right skill set. So you can't see it here. I had a slide here of the fundamental laws of nature. There are 5 of them that are very major. Hamiltonian mechanics, electrodynamics, statistical mechanics, quantum mechanics, and relativity. And so much of modern technology rests on that. In fact, even Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics, you wouldn't have the modern world without it. And by the way, 2 creationists, probably 3 creationists, were fundamental in the creation of electrodynamics. That'd be Newton, Faraday, and Maxwell. Imagine a world without electricity. You wouldn't have light bulbs. You'd have torches instead. You wouldn't have you wouldn't have automobiles. Instead, you'd have horses and buggies. Because so many of the parts of the car require electronics, like the spark plugs, the generators, the ignition coils, and all the sophisticated electronics in modern day cars. We wouldn't have airplanes for similar reasons. There wouldn't be a space age because you need electronics to make this, and you'd also need manufacturing processes. And you wouldn't have motors, you wouldn't have microwave ovens, you wouldn't have smartphones, you wouldn't have server farms and internet. I mean, just go offline, or at least imagine shutting off your circuit breaker to the house, and you'll see what it's like without electricity.
Yes, yeah. Hey, I have a friend who was in Tampa when the hurricane came through, and their power was off for over 7 days straight. And that was really traumatic and shocking.
Yes. And I'm just trying to contrast. This is what a theory of science, a real theory of experimentally verified science, how it contributes to the world. And the contrast to evolutionary theory is just, the gap is just unbelievable, what real science is compared to the religion of evolution. And even, I argued with an evolutionary evangelist who was a neuroscientist. And
I'm going to steal that phrase.
Evolutionary evangelist. I think that's more appropriate. Don't call them a biologist. They're evangelists. And I was saying, do you think evolutionary theory is as good as the theory of electromagnetism? And he said, yeah, absolutely. We have huge departments on evolutionary biology. And I was laughing. I said, there's something that is so basic in electromagnetic theory, you wouldn't be able to do your job as a neuroscientist. The idea of positive and negative. It was discovered by Ben Franklin. And then similarly, the idea of north and south poles was discovered by Gilbert. I said, if you had no notion of positive or negative, not only would you be able to not describe chemistry and the structure of the atom because you have negative electrons and positive protons, you would be able to do your job as a neuroscientist. But I know there are probably many neuroscientists out there who don't really believe in evolutionary theory. They can do their job just fine. And, beyond that, we could take the equations of electromagnetic theory. I've done this on my channel. It's something I'm actually quite proud of. You could take the equations of electromagnetic theory, make the D-Alembert, and show that you can develop Einstein's famous equation E equals mc squared. And you're able to also demonstrate elements of special relativity. Beyond that, we have top scientists. Even though they're the minority, we have still top scientists, Nobel Prize winners, like Richard Smalley, who is a patriarch of nanotechnology, won the Nobel Prize in chemistry. And then Ernst Chain, who co-developed penicillin with Alexander Fleming. Ernst Chain won the Nobel Prize in physiology and medicine. And Ernst Chain said about Darwinism, he said, it seems to me a hypothesis based on no evidence and irreconcilable with the facts. So now we have great scientists at the very top, historically, and then we also have evolutionary biologists starting to slowly jump ship. So when I try to defend creationism, I actually just go after evolutionary biology. I said, you guys are making my life easy. I just have to quote your side, in their
Yeah.
honest comments. It may not make the popular press, but I'm going to try to make it into the popular, take their stuff that's kind of been swept under the rug. I'm going to try to put it front page because the world needs to know the theory's falling apart. And that's why.
Yeah. Well, Ernst Chain, he also said this: I would rather believe in fairy tales than in such wild speculation. God cannot be explained away by such naive thoughts. And, there's also that website, Descent from Darwin. There's a big, huge number of scientists who have signed that. It's a scientific descent from Darwinism. Just check out the website, and we're linking to it from the show, and we'll have it in the show notes. But we've also, at Real Science Radio, we've kept a list of scientists doubting Darwin. It's at rsr.org/doubt. And you can go there and just see the whole list of the scientists who doubt Darwinism. And there was that fake news report from Newsweek magazine when they said that 99.86% of scientists believe in evolution. That was completely bogus. It was based on an analysis where they took the 700 scientists of the Creation Research Society and divided it by the number of scientists in the world to come up with such a ridiculous number. And then there was a Pew Research poll where all they did was poll scientists from the American Association for Advancement of Science. They're the ones who produce Science magazine. Well, that organization is almost all evolutionists. I mean, you get some creationists that will subscribe to that magazine, but they censor creationists from putting content in that magazine. As we've already talked about here, we see the incredible bias against creation scientists. That would be no different than polling only San Francisco of whether or not you agree with gay marriage. You only poll San Francisco, and then you produce that number and say, hey, look, how many people support gay marriage? It's completely bogus, and it's fake science.
Right.
But the important thing is, ultimately, does evolutionary theory have experimental evidence, or worse,
yes,
is there experimental evidence that's against it? And we've cited some of that, and it's really devastating. But one way to kind of, without getting into the nuts and bolts, just look at all the physicians. They rely on biological knowledge, and they are very respected in society. We have some notable names: Ben Carson, Raymond Damadian, the inventor of the MRI, Dr. Benjamin Aaron, who saved Ronald Reagan's life when there was an assassination attempt. He was Benjamin Aaron. My understanding was he was on the board of directors of the Institute of Creation Research. And there are other names like Michael Egnor, neurosurgeon, Howard Glicksman, and we'll, God willing, talk about Robert Matheny. And we have all these physicians, but I'll tell you what's really embarrassing for evolutionists. A 2005 poll of 1,472 physicians said 37% believe intelligent design is more accurate than evolution. You talk about huge numbers. What that tells me is you don't need evolution to do medicine. You don't need evolution to do research and experiments. And I'm going to even drive this point home harder. And this is in a climate where people are being totally indoctrinated. Every attempt is to censor and indoctrinate. And yet this large number of physicians. And yes.
Sal.
Yeah.
So what you just said, you just quoted a poll from 20 years ago, 2005. Earlier, you quoted Ernst Chain from 1970. So now my hope for peak Darwin is being shaken because I now realize that this has been fairly obvious for about 50 years to anybody who's actually paying attention and doing science and who's honest. And people like Ernst Chain have actually said it. It's been published. And yet the cracks in the Darwinian religious wall don't seem to have developed. What's going on?
I think there's a lot of cultural momentum, but it's changing because the old guard is just dying out and they're becoming irrelevant. And I'm going to even drive that point home more. I have here this Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This is a top-tier journal written, with the top scientists in the United States. In 2010, they said this: no medical school, No, medical school teaches evolutionary biology as a basic science. They were lamenting this fact.
Wow.
He said, no medical school teaches evolutionary biology as a basic science comparable to embryology. We're not even talking about electromagnetic theory or quantum mechanics, not even as good as embryology.
Wow.
That's pretty telling. Wow.
I wouldn't even put it in the realm of underwater basket weaving personally. And so the reason, now it's funny they made this admission because the reason they did this, they wanted to indoctrinate more doctors because they didn't believe in evolutionary biology. So they're trying to make the case, we need to teach, we need to insert these courses. And I was laughing. I said, look, they're doing just fine without you guys. You know, this is like DEI and transgenderism and inclusivity. I'm like, look, you're just piling your political biases. You're not really helping matters. You need to get guys to be able to do real science and do real medicine. That's the issue. This is just totally political. Now, Ben Carson, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And it's also kind of funny. He was, because he's one of the most famous surgeons from Johns Hopkins University, which, by the way, is my alma mater. He was supposed to speak at my graduation in 2013 when I got a master's in applied physics. Unfortunately, he said, marriage is between a man and a woman. They canned him just for saying that. But the year before, he spoke at Emory University. And when the faculty found out, particularly the biology faculty found out that he didn't believe in evolutionary theory, there was a letter of protest signed by 4 faculty, and they got 100 other faculty to join in, and then 500 students. It's just an absurd number. I said, that's total intimidation. And I realized you guys are real snowflakes. You would never have that with electromagnetic theory. There's no guy that's going to give a graduation address and say, I don't believe in electromagnetic theory. But here he comes, and the only way that they could defend it was through intimidation. They then instituted a policy of doing background checks on any future speaker. It's not that they're going to check his credit history or criminal record. They're going to check whether he doubts Darwinism. That was what was so funny. And here's Ben Carson at my school, and he was going to speak at my graduation. Even though he didn't, they had a very fine speaker instead. That was very inspiring. The people are standing up and say, we don't need evolutionary biology. And the funny thing is, from that proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, that's a tacit admission. Look, medicine has moved forward without you guys for decades.
Yeah. Yeah. If you go to our website, again, rsr.org/doubt, 570,000 medical doctors in the U.S., these are specialists in applied science. They say that God brought about or directly created humans. And 60% of medical doctors reject the secular Darwinist explanation. And again, we'll link to that page, and you can go find the references we have for this. 60%, despite the overwhelming propaganda from their side and the indoctrination into the belief of evolution. So great point, Sal.
So in addition to the doctors, we have physicists, we have chemists, including Richard Smalley, Nobel Prize winner. We have biochemists, including Ernst Chain, Nobel Prize winner. We have geneticists like my boss, John Sanford, and also Richard Buggs in England. We have microbiologists like Scott Minnick, Donald Ewart, Siegfried Schurer. And we have molecular and cell biologists and developmental biologists and biomedical engineers that reject Darwinism. And last but not least, we have evolutionary biologists that reject Darwinism. This is so funny. So you're like, well, why does this have to be shoved down the throat of people? It's for metaphysical, ideological reasons, not for science. And I have this sad story of Change 10 that I just need to share. It's going to drive home the point, and then we could talk about Robert Matheny. Change 10 came from communist China. She went to Ivy League schools, University of Pennsylvania and Harvard, her postdoc. She's a molecular cell biologist. She met George Smith, who was a Nobel Prize winner, and George Smith said, Dr. Tan, I think you should teach molecular biology. You're really good. I mean, a Nobel Prize winner picked her out. She was not a Christian at the time, came from communist China, Ivy League schools. You get the picture. Well, she started teaching molecular biology. And I asked her, how did you become a Christian creationist? And she said, well, I started teaching molecular biology. And part of that is showing the difference in the way molecular biology works in a prokaryote, which are your bacteria and archaea, versus eukaryote, which is like us and plants and other kinds of creatures. She said they're so radically different. And as she was teaching it, she said, we're the transitionals from one to the other. And she began to say, this can't evolve. And then she searched the literature. And they said, this is an outstanding problem in evolutionary biology. So if I may say, the creationists tend to focus too much on the human chimp evolution issue. If you focus on eukaryotes, you're going to be like that terrier killing all the rats. I mean, you'll have no opposition. They know this is a big problem. And this is where I'm very passionate about trying to teach the next generation. I said, you're going to win the battle in the molecular end. You're just going to steamroll. You're going to be like that terrier eating all those rats. Actually, they didn't eat them. They just killed them and just kind of left them in piles. It was kind of savage. Anyway, that cost changed Tan her career. That's why it's a sad story. She came out of the closet.
What do you mean it cost her career?
They fired her from the University of Missouri. She was a tenured associate professor. They fired her. Okay, I used the word fired her. You know how it goes. They'll like, we had a reduction in force, and great job for being our professor, but we don't have money to fund you. I mean, it's not really technically a firing. They did the same on Crocker, who was at George Mason, my undergrad alma mater, before I went to Johns Hopkins. And this is, you know how this plays out. They destroyed a career of an Ivy League level professor that was singled out to teach by a Nobel Prize winner. They did that. What they never did was address the paper she published in a creationist journal, which I wish she didn't do that. She could have easily put that, I think, in a secular journal and say, hey, these are all the challenges that are required to overcome. Because it was so thorough. I said, this is secular level stuff. They could have easily demonstrated that she was wrong if they had the science on their side. They didn't.
Well, let me ask you another question. Another question, Sal. Did they ever get her to recant her faith in Jesus Christ?
No, she's a Christian.
Okay.
We don't know what happened first, whether she became a creationist first or a Christian first. But you could see the amazing I could tell you, when you study biology at the molecular level, I've talked to so many Christian converts. I said, how'd you become a Christian? I said, I studied biochemistry. I studied cellular biology. And I'm like, I could totally see it. Maybe 40 years ago, that wasn't the case, but it is now. I'm seeing more and more just coming to faith. And with all the corrupt churches that are out there, this is heartening, because there's an avenue. There are Christian colleges that have gotten so compromised and corrupted, but it's the biochemistry and engineering departments that are bringing them back to faith. It's not the theology and religion departments.
Right.
Exactly.
Because the science is theologically unbiased. It's just reality. And that's God wrote that. It's unbiased truth. Amen.
So that's an example of Darwinism as religion. Now, okay, so I talked about the eukaryote prokaryote transition, or prokaryote eukaryote transition. But I found this article. It's a news article where they interviewed scientists, and the title is "The Long Winding Road to Eukaryotic Cells." The long and winding road to eukaryotic cells. And at the end of the article, one of the researchers said, "The nature of these deep evolutionary questions is that we will never know. We will never have a clear proof of some of the hypotheses we're trying to develop." But I'll add, okay, I'm going to insert this, but you got to believe it. You got to believe it, or you're going to have protests if you're Ben Carson, or you're going to lose your job if you're Change 10. But we can't. We'll never know if it's true. We'll never know how it happened. We have no mechanism. We'll have no proof, but you got to believe it. Is this science? Now, contrast, this is why I put electromagnetic theory on the table. Contrast electromagnetic theory to a theory like this. And you could extrapolate what she said about eukaryote, prokaryote evolution to almost anything else in evolutionary biology. Almost anything else. I said, what kind of a theory is that? Why are you saying that this is like so foundational to biology? It's irrelevant.
Yeah, it's remarkable. So, Sal, I did want to get your comment too on something that we're kind of overlooking is with this religious belief in evolutionary biology and just at the molecular level and at all levels of evolution, it's hampering the advancement of science. Just think of the science we've missed out on because of this path that they take. If they wouldn't take this path, there's a lot of things that we'd learn a lot sooner about, for example, immunology. How long did that get poo-pooed? Because, it's something that they can't explain with evolution. And I believe there's a lot of things in science and medicine that have been hampered by evolutionary beliefs and by the evolutionary science. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first off, the junk DNA thing, and that's, we've talked about that. Dan Graer said if ENCODE is right, which is the search into the functionality of the genome, ENCODE argued that probably 80% is functional, if not more. And Dan Graer, evolutionary biologist, said if ENCODE is right, then evolution is wrong. He went on a tirade lambasting hundreds of researchers, probably by at this point thousands, who are studying the non-coding areas of DNA. They're just simply trying to do their job to solve heritable diseases, to solve diabetes, etc. And he comes out here and says, look, your research has to be wrong because otherwise evolution's wrong. And, 90% of a lot of diseases that are associated with the genome are in the non-coding areas. These guys didn't come out, these researchers from top tier research institutions and universities didn't do this because they're trying to defend creationism, but they were suddenly being labeled as creationists. It was so funny. It was hilarious. The evolutionary biologists are starting to become marginalized. It's like, okay, you start behaving like that, no one's going to want to pay attention to you. And so that's an example of hindrance. Now, I wanted to touch on the work of Robert Matheny because we're running out of time.
Yes.
But this is an example of someone who made it through. And just think about what would happen if we suppressed him. For a time, there was a lot of embryonic stem cell therapies. Now, embryonic stem cell research, where you're doing it on rats and mice and other, chimpanzees, that's valid. There's ethical problems if we start doing that with human fetuses, aborted fetuses, or whatever. And not just the research, but then they were harvesting body parts, harvesting embryonic stem cells from random fetuses, and injecting them into humans, trying to cure them. The FDA, they're saying we need to invest billions. The embryonic stem cell therapy community was trying to push this. Billions of dollars were being wasted on it. Now the FDA is issuing cautions that these are crank therapies. Be careful. We're not sanctioning. We're allowing you to do it, but we're not giving our blessing. And if you think about it, why should this work? If you transplant a kidney from someone without finding out if it's compatible, that's bad. But they're just taking random cells, embryonic stem cells from these fetuses. You don't know how compatible, and they're just injecting it in places trying to hope for a cure. That's not going to work very well. So Robert Matheny, he was giving his research that he was able to regrow heart valves. Now that may sound amazing, but if you think about it, if you get a cut and you're bleeding, your body heals. It's actually regrowing cells. And if you break your bones, you can regrow them. You just have to extend that, and you can regrow heart valves. And he went at a conference once where they're talking about, various regenerative therapies. And he was about to speak, and they realized what he was about to say, the breakthroughs that he was going to announce. They sat him down and said, you can't speak, because it was going to destroy the embryonic stem cell industry.
Yeah.
The therapies, and not the research, but the therapies. And that was the greatest interview I think I was ever granted. He has now an FDA approved therapy to regrow heart valves. He's a cardiac thoracic surgeon. He's also a young earth creationist, or at least a creationist. I don't know if he's young earth. And it's an amazing interview because we were talking about regenerative, what he basically realized is he's able to reprogram cells to their youthful state. Reprogram, that's epigenetic reprogramming. And it's an hour-long video, and there are links either to my channel, and there's another channel that aired the interview that I had with him.
We'll link to that for sure. So Sal, just for my own understanding, so he's reprogramming cells that are already in the person. So is it adult stem cells or is it something different?
Differentiated, adult cells, which we call differentiated, but you're able to reprogram it to the youthful state.
Yeah.
A Nobel Prize winner by the name of Shinya Yamanaka realized there are 4 proteins, we call them Yamanaka factors. If you trigger them, they act like a reboot.
Yeah. And Fred, that's the thing is it's beyond even stem cells. What Dr. Metheny understands is that we can derive from adult stem cells ethically the growth factors that can reprogram existing cells to repair. It's amazing. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, so I worked for a biomedical firm, Ceridian BCT, and we developed a stem cell chamber for adult stem cells, which was really cool. And I talked to some of the biologists, and it was interesting there that these are a couple of them were PhDs, and I asked them about evolution, and they were like, they they were kind of like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, see, okay, you can see right there. They didn't need it. It's like whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's irrelevant. Now, I wanted to close out a few things about Robert Matheny. If you can reprogram and bring it to the youthful state, you can actually see how it might be feasible. Humans could have lived forever once upon a time. And we had that discussion, and he said, yeah, that correlates with the long ages of the patriarchs in Genesis chapter 5. And that was a big stumbling block for me when, 40 years ago, I was struggling with the faith. I said, I can't believe a human could live for 900 years. But now we're discovering like these immortalized cell lines and stuff. And then now that I've done some research, there are a few genetic switches that may have gotten, that's all it takes. It doesn't take a lot to make a person age quickly. You only need 3 nucleotides to have someone have this premature aging. Out of 3 billion, if you flip 3 of them, you age fast.
Yeah.
So, it's like there are probably not that many switches that needed to be turned off for us to be, only living, the typical lifespan. We could be living thousands of years.
Yeah. And, when they came out with that movie, The Ark in the Darkness, they have a great section towards the end of the film. And just how mathematically the ages of the patriarchs and how they dropped off after the flood. And it fits a mathematical pattern. So it's scientific in that regard. Because like you, Sal, I always thought when I saw the huge ages in the Bible, for some of these guys living to 900 years, 800 years, you're like, I thought it was just an error. Okay, it's an exaggeration. It's whatever. Because I was a believer at the time, but real ignorant and naive on a lot of things. And so, yeah, you're showing here where we were originally created to live forever on earth, and then we sinned, and man fell, and then God, likely, with the information, turned on a few knobs here and there, and now we don't live as long. And then after the flood, perhaps because of radioactivity, maybe that even speeds up, the process even more. But we can trust those long ages in the Bible. It actually fits scientifically.
I wanted to say there's an encouraging thing. I'm recently in a documentary, a major documentary, therealdavidplatt.com. It talks about corruption in the evangelical church. And it's really sad. There's been an invasion of just financial corruption, and then stuff of, for lack of a better word, the wokeness invasion.
Well, yeah, for lack of a better word, exactly what Paul warned Timothy about in 2 Timothy.
And then evolutionary theory. And I've been fighting it, but there's something encouraging here. The pastor that David Platt replaced was Lon Solomon, who built one of the biggest mega churches under his tenure. God built the church, but under Lon Solomon's tenure, it grew to be one of the biggest mega churches on the East Coast. And the thing that brought him to belief in God, he was a Jewish atheist. But in high school, he was at a summer camp of science and he studied enzymes for 6 weeks. And he said, he came to his dorm, the steps of his dorm one day, and he just shouted out, "There's got to be a God. There's got to be a God," because he studied enzymes. And what I'm finding is the disenfranchised who've been unhappy with their churches and who are either wandering from the faith, what has been bringing them back is the study of cellular biology and biochemistry. God has left evidence of his presence in the cells. And it's in the 21st century that we finally have access to this, right when we really needed people, something to help build our faith. It's there, it's been provided, and we have the tools. And I'm very, very excited. I'm excited to teach about enzymes and proteins and all the fabulous things in biology. And that might be the topic of another show. And, closing out with Robert Matheny, think about the great mind that would have been snuffed out in the skill if what happened to him, what happened to Change 10 happened to him. But think of all the fine minds that could be inspired, that could have their faith built if they studied God's creation the right way. They would be inspired, they'd be motivated, they would also contribute to the advancement of science, of real science, of experimental science, and not the religion of Darwinism.
Well, and that's the sad thing, is how many have been repressed and we didn't get their advancements in science. Who knows? It's just,
well, we will
really
know.
Tragic.
Unlike the evolutionary biologist who says we may never know, the one thing that we as Christians can say is we absolutely will know. In that day, everything's going to be revealed and all the truth is going to come out. And can you come back maybe even next week and we could talk about, I have a list. You could pick one.
Yeah, and again, Sal, we love having you on the show. I think you get to the heart of where we can win this battle, and I think it's even scriptural, the approach you're taking, because if you think of Romans chapter 1, verse 20, where it talks about God's invisible attributes are clearly seen by the things that are made, those are things that and also Hebrews, I think it's chapter 3, verse 4, where it talks about for every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. I mean, it's appealing to something that even a child can look at and see a house and know that had a designer. You can't necessarily do that if you just look at a rock or dirt. We're getting into things that have information in them, enzymes, proteins, just molecular biology. This is where we can, in my opinion, really win the battle, and I know you share that view. And that's why we love having you on. And so that's great. If you can come back next week, let's hit at this again. Let's keep those terriers going, Sal.
Yeah.
You're one of our terriers. And I hate to say the word rats, but that's, there's some validity there. So we'll keep we'll keep attacking where we think it's the most effective. God's invisible attributes are clearly seen. So great stuff as always, Sal. We'll have you back next week. This is great. So,
thank you for having me.
All right. So for Sal Cordova and my co-host Doug McBurney, I'm Fred Williams of Real Science Radio. May God bless you.